We are live. Welcome, everyone. We're going to start with a land acknowledgement. The campuses of San Francisco State University on the San Francisco Peninsula and North Bay are located within the occupied territories of the Ramaytush Ohlone and the coastal Miwok, who, along with the Southern Pomo, are organized as the Federated Indians of Grand Machiera. We're also going to do a salute, honor of the fallen. We also start by stopping for a moment of silence to honor all of the martyrs who have fallen in Gaza, the streets of Minneapolis, LA, and elsewhere in the United States, Congo, Sudan, Venezuela, South Africa, Lebanon, Puerto Rico, Kashmir, anywhere and everywhere around the world. We honor everybody, we honor a lot, so we also remember the martyrs who have fallen a long time ago, the martyrs who have fallen for our people's struggle, the martyrs who have continued to fall day in and day out. If you'll join us for a moment of silence.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Ramadan Kareem, Kul Sana wa Antum Salmin. And this is our show of Teaching Palestine, Pedagogical Praxis, and the Indivisibility of Justice, Ramadaniyat, part 1 of Ramadaniyat, that we are holding with such an amazing panel of friends, scholars, comrades, experts on Islamophobia. And we were going to do it last Thursday in honor of many occasions, specifically starting with the martyrdom of Malcolm X, who was martyred on February 19th in the arms of Yuri Kuchiyama. And this is also an important occasion because it is also the date of the Day of Remembrance of the incarceration and the incarceration of over 120,000 Japanese Americans and Japanese Latin Americans in concentration camps during World War II because of the United States designation and enactment of the 1798 law called Enemy Alien. And we wanted to do it on last Thursday, but we had at California State University, the Teamsters Union, which is one of the unions within California State University, had a strike from February 17th to the 20th. We are in California State Faculty Association, and we declared support of the Teamsters Union strike. So we decided we're not going to cross the picket line. And so we suspended all our activities. We're having our event today, our classroom, open classroom today. Also, the open classroom today is not in the name of AMED, Arab and Muslim Ethnicity and Diaspora Studies program, which is our program, because the University, San Francisco State University, has canceled our class on Islamophobia, which is the only class in the whole university. Actually, there are only like 4 or 5 classes in the university that teaches Islam, about Islam, not Islamophobia. But this is the only class we have. They canceled it. And so this class is not, the open classroom is not run in the name of AMED Studies. It is run in the name of Teaching Palestine, because the university has canceled the class, and we decided to run the open classroom and organize a series of teachings on Islamophobia during Ramadan, called Ramadaniyat, in order to provide the knowledge that is very much needed, especially in this day of age, and focus on several topics that are really important. One is, as I said, the Islamophobia, which is not enough to have a class, and we will talk about why we are doing it actually in San Francisco State. Why did we even have a class at San Francisco State? Even though at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, next door, our neighbors, there is a very important project that was started by our friend and brother and sibling, Dr. Hatem Bazian, Islamophobia project, and it was running, and we really didn't intend to have a class, to have even anything, because it was already be happening at Berkeley. And so we were planning to do it, but then certain things happened at San Francisco State that we had to start the project on Islamophobia, teach about Islamophobia, organize it, and now the only class we had after we started it in 2009, after 2008, 2009, the Israeli attack on Gaza, and it always is connected somehow. It always coincides, the attacks at San Francisco State on Islamophobic attacks against students, faculty, and staff. They always are coincide with what's happening in Palestine and the attacks in Palestine against Palestinians, Israeli attacks. So we started it, and we had to run it, and now even the only class we have is cancelled at this day and age. So we want to also talk a little bit about the history, talk about why it's important, and today we're also focusing and connecting with what's happening with ICE, that is happening throughout the United States against people, and the ways in which invocation of the enemy alien law from 1798 is being invoked against people from all backgrounds, immigrants from all backgrounds, and the ways in which the Trump administration is using that in a way that divide and conquer. So it's using it against immigrants from Latin America and elsewhere, presenting it in a way that makes it different than the ways in which it's using it against people from Arab and Muslim communities, as if they are different stories, when they are not really different, but in order to divide and conquer against people from different. So we want to talk about that in terms of what's happening by ICE and the administration. And we also have with us one of our colleagues here is Laith Gulum coming, and we will have people introduce themselves from Minneapolis, where this is also taking a very height of the, and also we have people who have been targeted by ICE around the question of Palestine and the genocide that's going on in Gaza. So this is also another reason we're holding this the first episode of Ramadaniyat on Islamophobia, and we also want to focus on specific cases that are going on, including cases that are being selectively ignored, uh, completely forgotten and erased, like such as the case of Liqa Kurdiya, who was also targeted and picked up around the demonstrations at the encampment at Columbia University. And we have two incredible women who are going to be discussing her case and other cases. Layla El Haddad and Amal Thabita. And we also have another doctoral student, who was also targeted by ICE, Mamadou Tal, joining us from who was at Cornell University. So we have a very full menu, a lot of things coming up. This is just a small teaser, if you will, that we will be having discussion. And what's the relationship with all of that? with empire. So we're going to go back and forth. The first order of business is I would like to ask our amazing people who are gathered here to just go around and just say who they are, what names, where you're coming from, just a little bit about who you are. So I'm going to start with Laith, who basically took themselves off the camera. So Laith, you need to come back and please introduce yourself and don't let me force me to step in and talk about your accolades. So please go ahead and say who you are, and then we will go around the panel and have people introduce themselves. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Rabab Abdel Hadi. I'm actually the director of senior scholar of the Arab and Muslim ethnicity and diaspora studies at San Francisco State University. I will be moderating this conversation. Laith, please go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Laith Galoom. I am a fourth year, I think. So fourth year ABD doctoral student in gender and sexuality studies at the University of Minnesota. I write about queer Iranian community building and Iranian American community building. So I was talking to someone and they were telling me you're really getting hit on both sides with what's going on in Iran and what's going on in Minnesota. So I'm happy to be here.
And you're in Minneapolis.
Yes, yeah, I'm joining from
Okay,
Minneapolis.
so we will be talking about that as well. And we'll go to Amal, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emel Tabata. I'm a staff attorney at the Clear Project. We are a legal nonprofit organization. We support movements, communities, and individuals that are targeted by the government under the guise of so-called national security and counterterrorism. We represent Liqa Kurdiya, who we'll be speaking about today. And I just appreciate you having me and giving me the opportunity to uplift her story.
Mamadou?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mamadou Tal. I am a fourth year ABD in the Department of Africana Studies at Cornell University. I'm currently in between the UK and Cairo because last year, March, I self-deported from the United States after being targeted by ICE, which I'm sure we'll talk more about.
Thank you. Leila?
Can you hear me? Because I couldn't hear
Yes.
him. I don't know why I
Yes.
couldn't hear him. Okay. I don't know if I was the only one. All right. Well, it's wonderful to be with all of you wonderful people. It's a real honor. Alhamdulillah. Ramadan Mubarak to all. My name is Leila Al-Haddad. I'm a Palestinian from Gaza. I'm an author, journalist, media strategist, mother, a few other things. And I'm joining you from Maryland.
Welcome, Hatem. Dr. Hatem.
Hatem Bazian. I'm coming to you from UC Berkeley in my office. I work on Islamophobia, also on Palestinian rights, chair of American Muslims for Palestine and Muslim Legal Fund of America.
Welcome everybody. And of course, what people have said, this is just a tip of the iceberg of all the things everybody does. There are so many facets to everybody's life. So we will get into it. Probably we won't be able to get into everything because there is so much in every single minute of the day of our incredible panel is here. For people who are joining us online, there is you can post your questions there and we will add them. And also when people start talking, we will post the bios so you can know who people are and look at them. And also we're going to be posting links in order for you to learn more about them and also learn what to do, because we're always learning, we're teaching, and we're also acting so we can have a better world. So it's always connected with each other. Nothing is separate from each other. So I wanted to start first to just have maybe Dr. Bazian, Hatem, to just go over why Islamophobia. People say that we've already studied Islamophobia. We talked about it a lot. So what's the problem if one class gets cancelled here? We've talked a lot about Islamophobia. We oversaturated it. Why do it? If you can just give us a short discussion, why? Why should we really bother? Is this something we should be bothered with? And then maybe next we can talk about the history of the project a little bit.
Well, why Islamophobia? Because Islamophobia is still the persistent form of racism that targets Muslims or those who are perceived Muslims. And if we look at the data shows that a continued high level of Islamophobic discourses. And if we can add the anti-immigrant sentiments that are shaped around, especially in Europe, but also in the United States, around the Muslim subject and being perceived and constructed as a threat. Now, even though that we have a considerable talk about Islamophobia among ourselves, when it comes to places of importance, of decision making, of policy, I would say that there is almost an absence, or if there is an engagement of the subject of Islamophobia, is only a symbolic engagement rather than a policy and addressing the structural element, that limits Muslim, Arab, Palestinians, and those who are perceived from their ability to have to speak in civil society, to have participation on an equal footing politically, to actually not be subject to harassment, intimidation, and discrimination at the job, and then also we'll think about the violence that have been committed. So I would say that the subject of Islamophobia is a subject that is out in the open as a subject, but definitely policymakers and institutions, whether at the university level, at the local government, national government, and then the private sector, the companies, all actually distance themselves from addressing Islamophobia as a type of racism that needs to be challenged. And for anyone that has been observing the past 3 years since the Gaza genocide, sees how Islamophobia have been weaponized, added to it also anti-Palestinian racism, to devastating impacts. And we are still have not yet begun to do any of the major work. The fact that a class on Islamophobia gets to be canceled at San Francisco State at this time is just but an indication of the layered levels of Islamophobia that is present within the institutions and within universities. So that would be my response to why Islamophobia and why we need to continue to engage in this subject. Lastly, I would say the anti-immigrant discourse of making America great again, making Europe white again, trying to stop the immigrants from coming is built on the identity of the Muslim and a global South. And you could see it in the discussion, even though that in the United States we see the focus on the Latino community, but remind people that Huntington Clash of Civilization, his focus was on Muslims and Chinese, and then later on when he wrote his second book, he actually shifted to say that the Latinos are the major threat to preventing America from continuing to be a white dominant society. So we have to actually understand this period while stitching in how Islamophobia actually tends to be a tool that is utilized to push these mega narrative on the political right, but also on the political left. Their expression of contingent solidarity with Arab Muslims, Palestinians, and so on is only contingent, especially as we see their navigation of how to express extreme unconditional support to Israel while simultaneously trying to give what you call small concessions to speaking about Islamophobia here and there.
Thank you, thank you. I'm gonna say Hatem without
Yeah, no, absolutely.
the honor of it, but you raised a lot of things, and I think one of some of them I just want to touch upon and move on. One of the things that for me is very very important around the whole the assassination of Malcolm X and honoring Malcolm X is very important. Maybe a couple of points, and then we also will ask. Mamadou, because Mamadou's part of the focus and research is also on Malcolm X. We'll go into that. But the fact that Malcolm X is always, he himself has spoken in the battle, in the ballot and the bullet in his speech. He says that, why is it that I'm always referred to as a Muslim minister, while other ministers who are Christian are never called Christian ministers? So even kind of adding the label is exceptionalizing, basically labeling that there are ministers and there are Muslim ministers. The same way that when you write in the press or refer to people and so on, you'll say that a person, and then you'll say a black person, an Arab person, and the added characterization to single out or to refer to people as something other than the norm. So there is the norm, and then the people who are outside of the norm or added. So this is something of creating the other, which you also speak about a lot. But also the ways in for me, it's very troubling that in the sense that even we're talking about Muhammad Ali and the fact that he was one of the major impetus for the anti-war movement in Vietnam, refusing to go and fight against people in Vietnam, which is also very important today against the hype to agitate the MAGA agitation and the Trump agitation against people of other parts of the world and other non-white against white supremacy and so on here. There isn't a whole lot of discussion about Muhammad Ali's Muslimness that also basically energized him and provoked him to refuse to fight against the Vietnamese, or that Malcolm X was his mentor. So the whole Muslim character part of this Muslimness is completely erased, and part of the erasure is also Islamophobia. You know, the erasure and the forgetfulness and the complete amnesia, not mentioning it, is also not giving credit to being Muslim about this is also part of it. So this is also an added layer of racism. But I wanted to go back also to the ways in which how does it work to kind of like forget about it. And when did we, and you said is San Francisco State. I'll talk a little bit maybe later on about how did it happen and why when we started the study of focusing on Islamophobia at San Francisco State. As I said, and I would like you maybe to talk about this because you were at San Francisco State as a student, undergrad, graduate student, MA, and had struggled a lot before you actually went and earned your PhD at Berkeley, and then became a professor and formed the Center on Islamophobia and the study of Islamophobia, the project on Islamophobia. One of the things that happened to us around 2009 when there was a protest of the student worrying about what's going on, and the college Republicans and the Zionist students came out and started stepping on a banner on which they wrote the Shahadatain, the second tenet in Islam, and they started stepping on it, saying this is Hamas flag, and before they used to say this is Taliban flag, and so on. The students were horrified, and I raised it in a meeting with the various departments in San Francisco State, the president's office, the deans, and so on. And I said, we really need to deal with Islamophobia. And said, well, Islamophobia is not supposed to be something that you get prosecuted about in the law. And this is when I said, well, we really need to do it, even though Hatem across the bay is already setting up a very important project, and we were welcome, invited to be part of it, and so on. Something needs to happen here on this campus, and we talked about it, and we started the project, and until now, actually, there isn't a statement from San Francisco State against Islamophobia. There were multiple attempts to have a statement, and the president asked us, and we brought in a very brilliant scholar to work with us to create the Islamophobia studies and so on. And he asked us to write a statement. We wrote a statement. We just removed the words or anti-Semitism and we put Islamophobia. It was unacceptable. And then he wrote a statement and we edited it for him and we said you can't say Islamic people and so on. Certain terminology he wasn't aware of it, I guess, and he refused to use it. And then it never made it to the university website. So now, even after so many years from 2019 to 2009 until now, we are 2026. The Accords gets cancelled, and the San Francisco State does not make it at this day and age so important. But I wanted to go back to also why do we call it enemy alien, and why do we connect it with the attack on the Japanese people in the Second World War. And last night, in another class, we hosted Grace Shimizu, who is a very active person in the Bay Area and an elder who is educating people and mentoring them, and part of the Japanese community, Latin Americans whose ancestors and parents were actually picked up, rounded from Latin America and put in concentration camps in Crystal City, Texas, and talking about what happened also to Latin American Japanese who were rounded up and were actually rounded up to be used as exchange communities during war with the Japan exchange communities. She explained what was going on, and this was under the enemy alien. And enemy alien, it's the law that we're talking about that now the U.S. is using parts of it to round up people and deport them. But it's also the title of a documentary that Konrad Ederer, who is a filmmaker, made about a Palestinian who was rounded up post 9/11 2001, Farouk Abdel Mati, and placed in a center in a prison in New Jersey. And Farouk was activist. Actually, I knew him when I was organizer in New York. And the Konrad Ederer, who's Japanese American, starts conversing with him what's going on. And in the process, Konrad also talks about his grandmother, who was also concentrated, incarcerated in the camps. And this is the law that actually constructs people as enemy alien, make meaning the enemy. Who is the enemy? Constructing who's supposed to be, and basically rousing up people in this country to figure out that other people who are not non-white that are the enemies. This is who are the enemy. This is who you're going to round up, which is also building up on many ways in which this country, United States of America, builds its own citizenship, its own nationness, and also its own ways of xenophobia, of excluding who belongs and who doesn't belong. And it builds on McCarthyism, excluding people, constructing who the enemy is in the 20th and the 30th, who's going to be deported and expelled. So constantly trying to find an enemy and build an enemy in order to wipe up and hype up the population, to find an enemy to blame, why there are problems, why there are economic problems, rather than accepting the blame of the government of what's going on. So this is something that connects all of it. But also you mentioned the whole question of Palestine and the ways in which the Islamophobia is very much entangled with the Israeli and the Zionist policies, and the ways in which constructing the enemy again, whether it is the United States doing it within the laws and within its action, or within whether it is covering up for the genocide, the crimes that Israel is doing. So I was wondering if you could say a few things, Hatem, and I want to move on to also hear from Leila and Amal about the case of Liqa, and circle back to Momodu. So would you just connect
Yeah.
with the whole question of Palestine, if you don't mind, and
Well,
other things if you'd like?
I think we just dealt with the uh, question in relations to the Palestine and the Palestine connection to Islamophobia. Early on, if you remember the article in the American Studies Association Journal, at the time, 70% of the funding for the Islamophobia industry came from pro-Israel sources, both Israel, Hasbara, Zionist organization, and so on. And I do think that in the current period, we need to be looking and connecting the fact that Israel has been identified in public opinion with genocide, and now there is a need to try to possibly shift public opinion from the Israeli perspective. This year they have almost quadrupled the budget for the Hasbara to close to $745 million. We also know from a research that they have done that one way to shift public opinion in the West to be more sympathetic to Israel is by the deployment of Islamophobic discourse, whether jihadism, Islamism, Islamic threat. And literally we see this. They looked at the data. It shows almost a 20 percentage point shift in public opinion. So these are, there's almost a correlation between the need to address the collapsing public standing of Israel being identified with the genocide and the re-emergence of a whole campaign of Islamophobic discourse, whether in Florida, Texas, in other places, as well as in Europe, as a way to try to remedy and to reverse, which in my view is irreversible at this point, but that's the discourse that we're seeing. So Palestine and the demonization of Palestinian is one structural pillar, both in relations to going back to Edward Said Orientalism, to Jack Shaheen's work on real bad Arabs, to all of the work on Islamophobia. You will find a major pillar standing in there is Palestine and the engagement of the pro-Israel grouping, organizations, civil society groupings that demonize Muslims in a way to protect Israel in order to actually convince the Western society that supporting Israel is in their best interest to try to counter, defeat, or contain the threat that is coming from Islam in general as a category, but they try to nuance it by creating these aspects of violent Islam, extremist Islam, and so on. But in reality, the discussion is about Islam per se as a category. So that's the dynamics that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Hatem. We'll pivot back in a while, but let's go to Amal, the lawyer from the Clear Clinic, and the Leila El Haddad to speak about the case of Liko and what has happened to her, and then we'll go to Mamadou to speak about all these issues and your own case, Mamadou, an analysis. So. Amal, can you please tell us about what's going on and also your analysis of what's happening in the case of Liko, and then we will pivot to Leila to speak about Liko and also to speak about the whole situation and your also experience as an activist and a Palestinian from Gaza.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rabab. So Leka Kordia is a 33-year-old Palestinian woman that's currently in ICE detention in Texas. She's been there in March. It'll be 1 year since she's been in detention. We all know all too well about the Trump administration's wave of repression that began in March last year, starting with Mahmoud Khalil and including others like Mohsen Madawi, Romisa Ozturk, and many, many, many others. Leka Kordia was one of those people. She attended a protest outside of the gates of Columbia University a year prior. Leka, was born in and lived in the West Bank, but her family's from Gaza. She's lost nearly 200 family members since the genocide in Gaza started. So naturally, many of us, she was compelled to join protests. She was arrested at the protest after getting caught up in a police sweep, but then the charges were shortly thereafter dropped. So a year later, ICE approached her. She was in the process of obtaining her green card. Her US citizen mother had petitioned for her. She had an approved family-based petition. So when ICE officers showed up at her home looking for her, and looking to speak with her, she thought it was, merely an issue with her application, something that's like quickly resolvable. And so she voluntarily appeared at Newark ICE's field office, where she was detained, thrown in an unmarked van, and flown 1,500 miles away from her home in Paterson, New Jersey, to Alvarado, Texas. Liqa, it's no secret that Liqa is being targeted, continues to be punished, and continues to be confined because of her advocacy for Palestine, because she's Palestinian. An immigration judge has ordered not once, but twice that Liqa can be released on a $20,000 bond. Both times, the government utilized procedural and legal loopholes and gamesmanship in order to keep her confined while they appeal the judge's decision. So using something called an automatic and discretionary stay, which is simply like a checkbox filing that requires almost no justification, the government was able to essentially pause the immigration judge's order in order to keep her indefinitely detained. So that's the reason why she's still there. It's also really notable to know that earlier this month, Liqa experienced a seizure for the first time in her life. This happened months after experiencing really poor malnutrition, really poor conditions at the facility, days after feeling sick. And she was rushed to the hospital, where she was hospitalized for over 72 hours. Within those 72 hours, her family and legal team didn't know where she was. We didn't know about her physical state. Frankly, we didn't know if she was dead or alive. We reached out to ICE multiple times in order to figure out if she was okay, to figure out where she was. And we received a response that it was essentially a safety issue to disclose her state or disclose where she was being hospitalized, which was incredibly absurd, because we later found out where she was because ICE told a reporter where she was being held. And that was the only way in which we found out which hospital Liqa was even being kept. Liqa is about to experience her second Ramadan in ICE detention. She's reaching the 1 year mark in which she's been confined, and it's really horrifying. It's really inhumane, the conditions she's endured. And maybe Leila, you can fill in a little bit here, but I'll sort of start with that, and we can get into the details.
Leila, okay, do you want to jump in here and speak some more about that?
Yes, I think Amal did a fantastic job there giving you the context. I do want to quickly touch on one thing related to what Dr. Hatem said, and then I'm going to dive back into the Liqa. First of all, I feel like I was back in college and I was listening and very fascinated, so thank you for that. But I do, and I'm going to drive the point home here because it's all connected back to Liqa. But in terms of what you said about how Islamophobia has been used or intersects with the issue of Gaza and the genocide, I remember very early on, I'm sure everybody remembers this, how Gallant said about in the first week of the war turned genocide that there would be no food and no water and so on allowed into Gaza because they were fighting human animals. And so we heard different iterations of this notion that Palestinians, the othering of Palestinians, whether, by the way, they were Muslim or not, but this notion of they are the subhumans to which the laws of war do not apply, therefore giving us as Israel the moral pretext we need to wage genocide against them. I thought was, interesting is not the correct, very sinister maybe is the correct word to use here. Application again, and very Islamophobic, right? But again, even invisibilizing, of course, our Christian Palestinian brothers and sisters. And so leading this back into Liqa, of course, I often get asked why her or what's unique about her case. And I would say she's triply vulnerable. And again, please, Amal, feel free to chime in here at any moment. When you have a lawyer listening, you're always a little nervous because you feel you might say something wrong. But I think she's triply vulnerable in the sense that she is Muslim, I would say even in quadruply. She's a woman, she's Muslim, she's Palestinian, and she's legally precarious in the sense that she's, you know, legally vulnerable. And of course, that has been ultimately weaponized, obviously in her case and so many other cases, as I would say, there's some of a historical continuity, right? A rebranding of all the things you mentioned, whether it was the incarceration of the Japanese, racism, Islamophobia, in this case, and a weaponization of immigration to be able to, again, maybe selectively against certain people engaged in dissent, with the ultimate goal, of course, of silencing that dissent. And so that's where Liqa, I would say her case falls into play, overlaps, of course, with all the other cases that we've heard mentioned, including that of Mamadou, of course, who I'm look forward to hearing from later. But people weren't initially seeing her, understanding her that way. She wasn't as public facing. She even rejects the term activist or organizer, even though I say that's kind of been thrust upon her. She always says to me, you know, I had a chance to visit her in person. I speak to her regularly. I visited her in December, alhamdulillah. And she always says, Layla, I don't know why people say that I'm an activist or I was just doing what any normal person should have been doing, in other words, a person with any kind of conscience or humanity. And I was motivated to do that, to act, to engage in exercising my First Amendment rights of protest, of free speech in the form of protest, to speak out against this genocide is something that any person should have been doing. But I was also informed by my lived experience as a Palestinian who endured brutal military occupation. And for that, of course, she paid for it with her freedom. But her name wasn't as visible in the beginning. People were confused. They were quick to entrap her and send her very far away from her community, from her home, which is, of course, a tactic that ICE has often used to disrupt and to disable the ability for activists and organizers of community to advocate on the incarcerated's behalf, of course. But in terms of, I'm trying to think of what we missed, and I'm happy if there's a specific question. I would say, generally speaking, people often ask me about the conditions there. As with many ICE jails, dungeons, I like to call them, around the country, are abhorrent. She has been denied halal food for the majority of her stay. She, as of course a very observant Muslim woman who wears hijab, who observes hijab, has trouble. She says the concept of privacy doesn't exist at all. She kind of smiled when I asked her about it. She's very graceful. She has this really quiet strength about her. She doesn't like to center herself, and this is another thing. She's constantly saying, I'm not the story here. There's a bigger story that people need to worry about. It's Palestine, it's Palestinian liberation, and she continues to be an advocate in the most beautiful of ways for all of the other women who are there with her. And she says, if anything, my stay here has only emboldened me to continue to speak out for anyone who has been oppressed. And so that's kind of summarizing her in a nutshell. She's a devoted and beloved community member, sister to a special needs brother, daughter, and observant Muslim, as I mentioned. And so I'm really glad you gave us a chance here to speak about her, because her case is, I think, and does overlap with all the things that we've been discussing in terms of Islamophobia, in terms of the targeting of Palestine activists and anyone involved in that organizing space.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Oh.
you're welcome.
No, thank you, because I wanted
okay.
to say this is not
Yes.
this is not the only, because you raised a lot of things that I want us to go back to, because several things that you raised, the whole question, and I want us to go back to and discuss more in details the whole question that you and Amal, and really thank you. And I would say, I think everybody in the community would say thank you, not only in our Arab Muslim Palestinian community, but in anybody who cares about justice, who cares about supporting people, who cares about human rights. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. But I also want us to come back and actually take up different threads of what you're discussing, because and I'll come back to them after we talk about have a chance for for Mamadou to
Yes,
make
please.
some initial comments, because you raised the question about the prisoners you talk about, and actually now we are launching a very big. We're continuing all the time. You know, the whole question of martyrs and prisoners are very, very big in Palestinian society and Palestinian community, because of all the large percentage of space and uh, portion that prisoners and martyrs occupy in Palestinian life and Palestinian society. And there is now the whole movement has demanded that prisoners should be a very, very big demand. The release, the end of torture, the stopping the execution, all the various violations and brutalities that the Israeli state, and I wouldn't just say the government because it's been going on and it's just escalating. That is part and parcel of genocide that Israel is waging against Palestinian people to erase the Palestinian people and try to end the Palestinian struggle. And so there is a very, very big campaign about prisoners, including the 1 million signature that is directed towards the Red Cross, because it is the body that is the only body that is allowed to go into prison and so on, but also the conditions in prison. All of I want us to come back and to talk about that because of this campaign that's going on now, culminating on April 17. The situation of women prisoners, what's happening, and a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, but
Yeah.
also about the prisoners in the U.S. The U.S. is the country with the
Yes.
largest number of prisoners. So all of these things are very much connected. I mean, the whole question of the
Yes.
prison industrial complex, incarcerate. So I want us to talk about that and talk about the ways you talked about, the way in which she's completely invisible, as if she's not arrested, she's not there. It's very problematic, and I want us to talk about what does this really mean in terms of analysis, and what does it mean in terms of invisibilizing a woman who went to, and also talk about why is she says that I don't talk about it, and I'm kind of like talk about that and discuss it. So this is not the last. You're just mentioning it, and then we'll come back to it and basically break it apart and discuss. And this is not the last time that we would like to have you come and talk to our students and to talk to the people and so on. So I want us to come back to that, but I would like to have Momodu speak about, first, Mamadou, if you actually speak about your own experience, and I want to come back also to speak about your research about Malcolm X and work, what happened to you, where you're at, and maybe pivot back to the research about Fanon and also. But if you can also first tell us about what happened to you, your own experience, and what happened at Cornell and an encampment and so on, and then we'll come back in terms of the whole question of analysis, if you don't mind. Go
Yes.
ahead, Mohammed. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much once again. And I'm delighted to be on such an esteemed panel. I follow the work of so many of my co-panelists as well. So thank you. Absolutely. So I think I've kind of told this story, I think so many times, but to kind of give a short version, or at least a truncated version, or at least a summarized version, is that after a sustained campaign on Cornell's campus, right, so immediately after October the 7th, students sprung into action, and we had a campaign for divestment. We had a campaign for to talk about, and ironically, what we realize in these times, that the institutions time and time again are not going to live up to their own guidelines, because effectively what we were asking for Cornell to uphold their own divestment guidelines, which is Cornell said we must consider divestment from genocide, war, and the maiming and killing of children. And we undoubtedly understood that to be the case of Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people. But whilst that was rejected, so there was a lot of, I guess, heat on Cornell's campus, and then a protest took place. So the encampment took place first and foremost. I was suspended from Cornell, and then I was allowed to come back onto Cornell, but I was banned from campus. And this was quite interesting because I was literally in a meeting with a police officer who drew on a map of basically effectively where I'm allowed to go on campus, because I lived on campus. And effectively for me, that meant I was allowed to leave my house and go leave my house and go left and not go right. And I said it ironically in that meeting that we were protesting forms of apartheid and bordering, and we're seeing the logics of carcerality being reproduced at the university, right? And I'm now being subjected to bordering. And when we say things of borders, we know it doesn't stop and start at the airport. The institutions like universities also reproduce logics of carcerality, which we can talk a bit about as well. Fast forward to September, we attended a protest for 5 minutes in which there was two of our targets of our divestment campaign, L3 Harris and Boeing. That was brought to a standstill. I left after 5 minutes, and then the police officer saw me leaving. He's someone that we had few run-ins before. I was suspended immediately, right? And not just suspended, I was suspended to the point where I was about to lose my status, which meant lose my student visa. With a lot of backlash from online public, Cornell relented and said, okay, you will never teach at Cornell, because I was, ironically as well, we're talking about white supremacy, I was teaching a class called What is Blackness? And I had several Zionists calling to my department saying, what is this class? And I was laughing because the class hadn't even started yet, and I had already got complaints about the class, which shows their white supremacy and proves their racism and anti-Blackness, coupled with anti-Palestinian racism as well, right? So end of 2024, the New York Post did a spread talking about where we are preparing a list from Beta, the right-wing Zionist organization. I shouldn't have to qualify by saying right-wing Zionism. So the Zionist organization from Beta said, we have compiled a list of students to give to Trump on day one to be deported. And in that New York Post article, I was the only one named, right? So I guess, thinking to myself, I kind of thought, okay, my time in the US is probably kind of come to a close. I just didn't think it was going to be as expedited than it was, that it actually was. And effectively, my legal team said to me, after Trump got into office and he signed combating anti-Semitism executive orders, my legal team said to me, Mamadou, you're undoubtedly going to become a target. So what do you want to do? Do you want to basically lay in hiding until you can get through your third year and become ABD and then leave? Or we can seek an injunction in the hope that it protects you, and we'll seek a national injunction to protect myself and other similar situated persons. And I believe my lawsuit went up. And so I sued Trump in a federal court in New York. And I believe that was a few days after Mahmoud Khalil was picked up by ICE and kidnapped by ICE. Again, I guess my naivete at the time led me to believe that maybe I'm going to go to the first round of court, and then maybe go to a court of appeals, and then maybe go to Supreme Court, and we'll find out. Immediately on the day I filed my lawsuit, I got a tip that said the FBI and ICE are, and this is not uncommon for them to work together, that are coming to look for me. It was Ramadan as well. I was fasting at the time. I was in hiding for 2.5 weeks. The Biden recent appointed to the bench, a Biden appointee, ruled against me. So we filed a habeas corpus, etc. And then after 2.5 weeks of being in hiding, 3 days after my lawsuit was filed, we received an email from the government's lawyer saying that my legal team must surrender me to ICE custody. And that was never going to happen, right? And then 2.5 weeks after, my legal team effectively said that given the kind of flagrant disregard of the judiciary in this moment, we don't know if even a favorable ruling will keep you safe, that you can walk the streets again. So it was very abrupt, my decision, but I decided that I've kind of done what I could at this point, and I decided to self-deport, and then I went through the border up to Canada. I think that was almost, and I believe it's almost about to be a year anniversary of that time, how time flies. And then me thinking that I'm going to, go to a life of, I guess, quite calm, quiet, I couldn't have been more wrong. Just 3 weeks ago, I'm a British citizen. I was going back to the UK. As I got off the plane, 3 officers were waiting. 3 officers in civilian clothing were waiting for me. They said my name, Mamadou Tal. I said yes. They told me that the British counterterrorism police, and I am being detained Schedule 7. For those who are aware of Schedule 7 is a shadowy law that disproportionately targets Muslims, because you are allowed to be detained and you're allowed to have, I mean, my DNA swab was taken. I was told to do a 360 to have pictures taken of me. My fingerprint and my palm prints were taken all in the airport. I was held for the maximum legal limit of 6 hours. And they tell you, make it very clear that under Schedule 7, you do not have the right to remain silent, right? And if you do, it's a criminal offense and you could be subjected to an immediate 3-month prison sentence, right? And I think for context, for how bleak that is, I could be accused of murdering the monarch and still have a right to remain silent, right? And again, Schedule 7 says, even if there's not even a suspicion, but however, they might suspect you might be in the commission of doing a terrorist act. And what was fascinating to me, in those 6 hours of interrogation, they asked me about Palestine one time, a 1.5 time. One question they asked me was, what color keffiyeh do you wear? And the second question they asked me was, do I think October the 7th was an inside job by Israel? To which I emphatically replied that I believe Hamas did it. And what was fascinating as well about the questioning, that they asked me, does my mother wear hijab? Do I practice Islam? When did I start practicing Islam? Which sheikhs do I listen to? Which Muslim countries have I visited? So all to get to say that, again, when we talk about the logics of the war on terror and how they intertwine with carcerality as well, especially as it pertains to Palestine, you cannot disentangle the Islamophobia, because again, this was for me a clearly racist, Islamophobic fishing expedition of a visibly practicing Muslim man who's pro-Palestinian. And yeah, sorry to go on, but we can talk more about that if anyone has any questions. Thank you.
That's not a problem. You can go on. I'm actually very fascinated thinking about, like, should we even have another episode with all of you to kind of engage in the various issues that you have raised, because you've spoken about multiple things. Incidentally, I was invited to Cornell University last spring, and I knew that you were there and you were organizing, and I met with the students. And they were saying, oh, this is where Mamadou used to live. This is where we had the encampment. This is what's going on. And they also talked about the 60s activism of the students and how one of the alumni came. And this is what we learned. We learned to build companies and so on. But the students also talked about the way Cornell is also built on indigenous lands and how Cornell is benefiting from that and what's going on. But you also spoke about how you had to self-deport. And reminds me, on Saturday, a very well-known Palestinian activist and leader passed away, Ghazi Masood, and he was in the U.S. and he was targeted. But this is back in the I think the late 70s or 80s, and he was targeted also for technicalities. This is similar things of other people, which reminds me of what's going on with Liqa. And this is a lot of the times technicalities are used to, and he basically decided to self-deport before they come and catch him. And this happened also to students at Columbia when Mahmoud was snatched and basically kidnapped by ICE and Rumaisa as well. And many people, they were actually just kidnapping people and putting them away. Many people decided, and students basically, some of them went to Canada right away before they were kidnapped. But also the ways in which ICE and many governmental agencies use things that are illegal by the laws of the United States itself. Like, it's set and they violate their own laws. And secondly, in the ways they use a lot of technical issues to accomplish goals that are other goals, but use these technical things like they're doing with Liqa, for example, in order for them to accomplish their goals. And so when we need to be very careful when we say this is illegal and this is legal and so on, because it doesn't really matter whether it is legal or illegal. When oppressive powers want to accomplish something, they will do it. And this is what happened to you also in Britain, that they twist the law and they will do it. And this is what's happening also now to Palestine Action. So all of these things are happening everywhere. And I want to also go back and say, this is also what's happening to Palestinian prisoners. And so there is a lot of issues we need to talk about. That the stories that you are telling and bringing up, and I'm saying stories, that doesn't mean they are unreal. There are real people's stories, real people life and so on. It doesn't make it less intellectual and less analytical. It's actually, this is what's happening to people that the mainstream press and the media does not. The hegemonic stories do not get them out. And it's really important for us to listen to them, understand what's going on, and explain what's happening in order for us to figure out ways to stop them. The other thing that I think is really important, what you said, is you're wanting to teach a course, and all of a sudden, they're already, the attacks begin even before what is going on, because the attack is not about what is the content of the course, or it is about the content, because maybe the goal is to prevent students from learning about what's going on. So the content, the objective is to prevent students and people from learning about what's going on. So shutting down the narratives and making sure the Zionist narrative and the white supremacist narrative stays and is not challenged at all is very, very important. And this is big part of the Trump agenda, big part of shutting down the curriculum and what's going on. So this is what you are talking about. The things that we discuss are really important to silence, not allow it to be put out. So I want us to speak about that, but I want us to maybe before we move on to another channel, I want you to speak a little bit about what you do, Mamadou, your analysis about Malcolm X, what you do, and your own work and your own dissertation and your studies. If you don't mind sharing that with us.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
Why is Mamadou Tal so dangerous?
I wish I knew. I really don't know. I'm in Africana, but actually, I think it speaks to what you're saying, Dr. Rabab. When we're talking about what is the point of these studies, like Black studies, right? I remember people often, so many of our Muslim brethren oftentimes are like, "Oh, why are you in the humanities and what about STEM?" But I think when we understand the legacy and history and the purpose, at least, and I'm not trying to say Black studies upholds this. I have a lot of critique of how it is today, but at least its stated objective, or at least from its inception, it was to offer an imminent critique of Western liberalism. And that's why Africana studies is important, because it's easy to offer a critique from the outside. But when you're saying, no, by your own logics, you do not produce the subjectivities in which you say you produce, right? By equality, etc. So my project focuses on, I'm revisiting the anti-colonial era in West Africa to ask the question, what does a sovereign development project look like from the perspective of a West African? And I think that's my work, and that's what I'm involved with. But just to kind of go on to how and as well, my background is that I hold an Islamic license in Sharia and Arabic from Al-Azhar Mosque as well. So that's kind of my connection to Islam, and why the topic of Islamophobia also features in my work as well, being a West African Muslim. But I think fundamentally, you cannot tell the story of modernity without its constitutive elements, and I think it's undoubted for my reading of modernity. And when I say modernity, I know a lot of people say that, so I think it's important that I define my term. I'm talking about the inauguration of a particular world system under colonial capitalism, and I'm talking about the politics of Europe in about the 14th century that have then been expanded out globally. And that's my definition, how I understand modernity, not a particular time. I know some people talk about 1492. I try to avoid that for various reasons. But yes, for me, when I talk about the constitutive elements of modernity, I don't think you can divorce that from Islamophobia and anti-Blackness. And my evidence for that is when we talk about Al-Andalus, when we talk about the language of the Saracens, the language of the Moors, the language that was used to denigrate and to otherize Muslims who are North African Muslims, and also some are West African as well, in Islamic Spain and beyond. We find that language repurposed and reproduced when Columbus comes to the Americas. So I'm talking about a longue durée history of white supremacy, a longue durée history of otherization of white versus the other. And we find that from the language of talking about Muslims. So for me, it's not a surprise when you hear the Israelis talk about people of light and darkness. It's not surprising that the Islamophobia is so normalized in our streets, because I think, again, with war on terror, for me, it's just another instantiation of that long history of modernity's constitutive elements, and one being Islamophobia. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think this is so important, because actually I think everybody would relate to this. And Hatem was speaking about the whole question of the clash of civilizations. In my courses, I start always with the 1492, and I ask the students about this man who got lost, and then he's made into a hero. And then he's got lost. Why did he even call these islands West Indies? I mean, why are they called? Because he was hoping to get to the Indies, but also getting even deeper and thinking about 1492, because a lot of people know that in fighting the battle in Andalusia, the Castilian kings, Spanish kings, actually engaged in the Inquisition and the torture and the expulsion of Jews from Andalusia. But rarely there are historical studies that speak about the Inquisition and the expulsion and torture of Muslims, forcing Muslims to eat pork, to drink wine, and so on, to see if they were actually converted to Christianity or not. Forced conversion. This is not willing. And this is not a choice conversion. And now what's going on in the Spanish state in Iberia is the let's just say the revision of the intentional collective amnesia to rewrite history and say that it was really wonderful in the 14th, 15th century, what you're talking about, Mamadou. And this is something that we really need to, as in the Spanish state, we really need to rethink and look at and understand what's going on. Also, because a lot of people, Muslims, or let's say Spaniards, are wondering why is it that many people in the household are reliving conditions that they don't know why, and then they trace and they find out that these are traditions and rituals that their grandparents and ancestors and so on are going through because they were hidden, secretive Muslims that they were not able to do. And this actually links up, and I think people who know me know that I really love to engage in comparative studies, and comparative doesn't mean everything is the same, but it also immediately reminds us to go into what happened in when the United, well, not the United States only, all the settler colonial regimes in the Western Hemisphere basically kidnapped and enslaved people from Africa, mostly from West Africa. So we're talking about also a particular geographies that and enslaved people, and then many Africans basically hid their religions and pretended that they adopted Christianity, enforced Christian, not the Christianity of Palestine, not the Christianity of Jesus Christ, but this is a different institutional and actually very oppressive Christianity that came with colonialism, and it also went to Africa in some places, but also enforced. So then there's a lot of traditions that have to do with the many African religions and so on. So it's a lot of the things that are really important. So when students ask, or when universities ask or institutions ask, why are you teaching this material? It has nothing to do with it. It is outside of this. We shouldn't really think about it. It doesn't really concern us. Actually, it does, because it's very much connected with each other. And this is exactly what MAGA, the right wing, white supremacy doesn't want people to learn about, because all of these are connection. And this is exactly also what the European Union, what the US, what Israel are trying to do also to Palestinian curriculum. So all of this stuff is completely forgotten. And so there is things that are connected, and it's really important for us to think about how they are connected, because if we don't see them as connected everywhere, and there is an intentional effort to prevent us from connecting things with each other, we forget about our minds think in a certain way. And I wanted to come back to maybe think about how do Layla, in particular, you've done a lot of work about the whole question of kitchen and food, and how food is a very also political and a resistance culture of resistance in the work that you do, and how it's been related to, and maybe come back to see if Amal, you have some comments about that. Atem, I know you do, because we've been working about this together, and back to you, Mamadou. So I'm just wondering if you can talk about this, and then this conversation, when we can take another thread that you've mentioned. So Amal, do you want to say something? Layla.
Yes, specifically about food as
Yeah,
resistance. I wasn't
yeah.
following. Okay.
Yes, yes. Food and culture and the whole thing
Yes,
that you
yes,
did
yes.
was, and you took Bourdain, who I'm still angry with because he took his life. And anyway,
I
yeah.
know. Yes, haram عليك, you're making me talk about food when I'm fasting, but so,
Oh, I am so sorry. We can do it
no, no,
after
I'm just
Ramadan.
joking.
Okay, yeah.
I'm just joking. It's very timely, actually, because there was a podcast that I recorded several months ago on Tarwida that about this topic that is that just came out actually yesterday. Oh gosh, yeah, I could spend the whole hour talking about this. You know,
May I
you
interrupt you and say that you give us the link maybe after you finish talking so we can put it
yes,
in the, yeah, okay.
I will
Yeah,
do that in a
go ahead.
second.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, you came to my subject of passion, you know, so you're gonna have to stop me so I don't go on.
I will.
In fact, I was very much enjoying listening to Mamadou. I would have not minded if he continued to talk for the entire hour. So thank you for everything that you said. Okay, where do I start? Bismillah. So, I mean, maybe if you, maybe in the context of Gaza, I'll start there because there's so many different places I
Yeah.
can start this. Uh, you know, maybe first I'll say, often I get asked, you know, this is something I've been interested in for a very long time. When I finished, you know, I wasn't born and raised here. I was between Gaza and between various parts of the Gulf, like many Palestinians. When I finished studying here, I returned to Gaza. I lived there, worked there for a journalist for many years, and became interested in sort of this more ethnographic approach to telling the story of Gaza and by extension of Palestine and the Palestinian experience through the lens of food, because I recognized that there was a lot going on there. And so I began to document the Palestinian culinary heritage, specifically of Gaza. Of course, Gaza itself is a majority of population of Palestinian refugees and their descendants who were driven from their homes from during the Nakba. And so it makes it an interesting place to obviously experience a much broader area of historic Palestine that has been physically erased, but very much exists in the collective memory and in the palates of Palestinians. Now I'm going to fast forward a little bit because what happens during the genocide is that suddenly the focal point or one of the focal points becomes food. It was one of the ways that I think became central as a theme to what was unfolding and what continues to unfold. In the sense that, but I think not in the ways necessarily. I think it was a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, it was weaponized, and this is something keeping with the theme of, you know, the broader themes here, that we have seen colonists the world over, including here, obviously, on Turtle Island, use to subdue, to control population. And this is well documented. And so on one hand, it was weaponized by Israel. And this is just part of a very long-standing control of Israel over over the Palestinian food sector. So it's not new, but in particular in Gaza, where they controlled every aspect of the food sector in terms of what was allowed in, what was allowed out, what could be grown at what time, what kind of seeds Palestinians had access to, how far into the sea they could fish, how far they could farm, and when, and so on, what access to water they had. So this isn't new, but it suddenly was amplified, right? And there was a lot of focus on it, and a lot more people were suddenly becoming aware of this weaponization of food. And on the flip side of that, Palestinians were also, and this is what I found really interesting, using this, you know, giving them a dose of their own medicine, kind of using food as a tool of resistance to erasure, to genocide, and not, you know, I'm talking about food here, but it can be extended as well. Food as part of culture more broadly, right? And there's many examples of this. I'll give two maybe. One of the ones that stands out in my mind the most is maybe because of the algorithm, maybe you know, because I'm very interested in this. I was getting a lot of reels of Palestinians, but I'm sure a lot of people were too. Palestinians in Gaza cooking at the height of the genocide, and some of these we might be familiar with. Others maybe were a little bit more obscure. But one in particular was of a young social media personality in Gaza called Aboud. I don't know how many people are familiar with him because he only posts in Arabic. And Aboud stayed in the north of Gaza, where my family is from and where they remained, alhamdulillah, where they are today. And at literally the height of the forced, the engineered starvation, his videos were very humorous, right? There was a kind of a little bit of levity to them. He picked up a leaf of common mallow. In Arabic, it's known as khubeza. And he lifts it up and he says, today, my beloved audience, we're going to speak about khubeza. This very humble leaf has stood by us when almost the entire world, or he was speaking mainly about the region, about the entire region, the Arab world, the Muslim world, has abandoned us and left us alone. And so an ode and praise to this humble leaf who has helped us make it through this starvation. And he proceeds to talk about how, instead of cabbage, we have to eat stuffed cabbage manfouf, we have to eat khubeza. Instead of nukhiyya, we have to eat khubeza. Instead of these traditional Ghazawi dishes, sumagiya, we have to eat khubeza. And then he laughs and says, I'm so sick of khubeza, but alhamdulillah for khubeza, right? And so this is just one way, this knowledge of foraging, that I had people, ironically, calling me, friends and family from the besieged north, saying, Leila, we remember you used to collect these recipes, but we didn't know. We never had an interest in learning how to cook khubeza. Can you tell us? We know that you had this book. And I was like, me? You want me to teach you? And so I find myself in this very awkward position. And I found the work that I did suddenly, became more than an archive. It became a toolkit almost to resist genocide, a culinary toolkit. And so literally people were telling me, send us screenshots, send us these recipes. Our grandmother was killed. We don't have an elder to teach us. But they were using this knowledge of and their connection to the land, their very intimate connection to the land, to survive, quite literally. Another example that I give is of cousins that I spoke to. And this was replicated over and over throughout Gaza, who, again, at the height of one of the worst periods of the genocide, were insisting on making celebratory dishes, not just sumagiya, but things like ka'ak, cookies for Eid, right? And it struck me as odd. But in speaking to them, they told me you're underestimating how important such and how radical a simple act and a joyful act like this can be, right? Whether it's something non-religious, like maybe celebrating a birthday, which we also saw a lot of, or something religious and celebratory, like preparing an otherwise kind of laborious and a dish that can be require expensive ingredients to make, like ka'ak. And it was what she called wartime ka'ak. So no yeast, no spices. A neighbor gave them a little bit of this, the other neighbor gave them a little bit of that. And lo and behold, they suddenly had ka'ak and the children were all laughing and they felt human and they felt dignified for just a very small period of time. And I feel like, again, this connects more broadly to everything we spoke about, to our political prisoners, to the qat, because these systems are designed to strip you of your basic humanity, to strip you of your dignity, to strip you of all hope. And in being able to partake in preserving your culture, in using, in preparing your traditional foods, in cooking and resisting in these ways is incredibly, I think, uplifting and serves as a way, as a repository of dignity in a time when these things are being actively taken from you. You should stop me because I will keep going for the next hour. Hello? Am I alone here? For some reason, I can't hear anyone else. I'm going to put the YouTube on.
No, neither can I actually. So
I think there might be just a technical issue. Just give us.
You can't hear me because I had my my mute on, but I wanted to actually say about the khubeza. Khubeza is one of the herbs that Israel has banned. Like there is a whole bunch of Palestinian herbs, natural herbs like akub and za'atar, and actually Israel has banned. They're banned to be collected by Palestinians. This is something that's actually, as part of the it's definitely food is very, and I actually want us to talk about this more and so on, but I want to also have other people. This is definitely something that we really need to talk about. Also, this is something that is very weaponized now in terms of the food that's being used in the intentional starvation, not allowing food, but also how people are using it in order to survive. How it has been used in order to talk about the heritage, the culture, the folklore, what people are doing, and how is also Israel is using it to steal food in terms of like maftoul is called quote unquote Israeli couscous, and all of these narratives that actually don't exist, reinvented and so on, and everywhere. So I think this is something that we should really be talking about. Somebody says, yes, let's do another episode. So we should definitely be talking about this more and more, and figuring out what else we can discuss. There is a lot of things that we want to discuss, but I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak about that. And I want to go back to Amal and say, in terms of liqa, the question of if you want to say some more about what is she eating in terms of nourishment and so on, because I know many of the freed Palestinian prisoners who are able to speak a little bit about what's going on, because not all Palestinian prisoners can speak now, and not all Palestinian prisoners are being visited by lawyers, even by the International Committee of the Red Cross. They're talking about historically did not get enough food and definitely no medicine whatsoever. That's why many are die, become martyrs in prison itself. But also now, since October 7, they have their food has been reduced a lot. So if you can speak a little bit more about what Liqa is receiving in prison, and what can people do also in terms of making sure that she receives, at the very least now, one of the aspects of her life, not all of them. What is she getting? What does she need? Okay, so we can, people who are, can do something about it.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked. So just to speak about the conditions at the facility, Liqa has been denied her multiple
You're
requests.
muted, Amal. Unmute, please.
Can you hear me?
No, I can hear Amal. I can hear her.
Okay, great.
You're still muted.
I think hopefully others are able to hear me, but let me
Still
know
muted.
if
I can hear Amal. Sorry. So,
I'm just gonna shoot her a message.
No.
do you want to try go on mute and come back on and off? See if that does anything.
Now? No, it says the mute. The mic is still has a cross around it.
Yeah, it might be an issue with your internet, Rabab. How about now?
Yeah, we
Still
could
can't
hear
hear
you.
me?
No, it's not just you, Layla. It's Amal. The mic is also on Amal's screen, crossed. Keep trying. Why don't I go to Hatem to speak about this, because I know that Hatem also has. Yeah, you're actually, your mic is, there is a cross from it. So Hatem, do you want to weigh in a bit about this, because this is very much part and parcel also of the stuff that we're also dealing with in the International Islamophobia Research Association. So if you want also on our work, do you want to say a few things while
Well, I actually,
weigh in while Amal is fixing her
I
sound?
wanted to
Mike?
actually to take a thread from
Go
Mamadou's.
ahead. And you're muted, Hatem, too. I can't hear you.
I can hear him. I'm not sure if the issue
Same.
is on your end, because
I
I think we
think
can
it's
all
only
hear
on
each
your
other.
No,
end,
you're still muted.
Rabab.
Laith, maybe it is from your side.
So people are also hearing us.
Can you
So
check? Layla, can you try? Because maybe something is happening.
I can
You can hear
hear
me,
them
right?
loud and clear.
Only on
I'm
your
wondering,
end.
can the audience hear us? They can.
yes,
Okay. So then I
I'm
think
the
it
only
might
one
be,
nobody can hear?
yeah.
yes.
Okay, go ahead, go ahead. Oh, somebody says we can hear you all. Go ahead, Hatem. I can, yeah. Go ahead,
Yeah,
please.
I wanted
And
to
Amal,
pick
go
up.
ahead. Maybe I'm the one who's not hearing.
I wanted to pick up the
Okay,
thread
let's go
from.
back to Amal, and then we come back to you, Hatem. Go ahead, Amal.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about the back and forth, Hatem. I'll be brief. was essentially what I was saying was Liqa has made multiple requests for halal food since she's been detained for nearly a year now. They've been denied. So because the food that the facility is providing is not conforming with her dietary needs, and just because it's incredibly just inedible, she's been essentially having to just supplement and forced to live on snacks from the commissary, which, really depends on her family providing her, essentially weekly allowance so that she can buy food from the commissary and essentially create meals that way. So I'm glad that you uplifted that. And there was another question that you asked that I'm forgetting now. Oh, what people can do for her. So there's definitely, there's a lot that those who are listening and are interested in helping uplift Liqat's story and supporting her, there's a lot that you can do. One, sort of the common theme with Liqat's story is that so many just don't know about her story, about her case. So, saying her name, spreading the word, following on Instagram at Free Liqat Kurdiya for updates, for statements from her and loved ones, and really just for updates in the legal case. That's one thing you can do. There's also Amnesty International has created a toolkit online, so that there's a lot of different calls to action there that people can engage in. You can coordinate a phone banking campaign, call your representatives and demand that she be released. You can sign, there's a petition that you can sign to elected officials that's calling for her release. And of course, you can also organize a letter writing campaign. These letters are what keeps Liqat steadfast, keeps her, makes her feel loved and really supported. So those are just a few things that you can do to support her.
To the can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
I can hear you.
Yeah, if you can give us some links so we can add to the show, it would be really helpful. While maybe somebody else can speak. Dr. Hatem?
Yeah, I wanted to pick up from Mamadou's comment about Schedule 7 detention at the airport, and referring him to the PREVENT program in the UK, which is the whole infrastructure of anti-terrorism. And what is important for us to understand is the structural apparatus that is in place, which predates actually 9/11, the first comprehensive anti-terrorism and law that was put into the books during the Clinton administration, declaring a state of emergency with the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. And the fact that here is Mamadou having to self-deport from the United States, where supposedly the European Union and various human rights organizations are pointing to the massive violations that are taking place. But we need to separate between the public noise that often we hear from these what you call polite, respectful, suit and ties environment versus the structural, almost concurrent agreement, cooperation, and coordination that takes place, which finds itself pointed directly at whenever the question and the issue of Palestine is at play. So Muhammadu leaves from the United States, and the important question that's the UK should actually be a country that would immediately come to the defense of Muhammadu, that they should have their counselor from the embassy dealing with legal issues be actually coordinating and trying to see how they would protect his rights, since his entry to the United States has been legal, protected, and so on, and not to actually have to face the PREVENT and the Schedule 7, which meaning that they are literally treating him as a potential terrorist. That is the language that comes through this coordination, and at the intelligence services and at the level of cooperations, the UK, the Canadian, the French, the Americans, and other countries, they coordinate in this. So now he is tagged by this process. The PREVENT program was also the model that was used for the United States CVE, Countering Violent Extremism. And that is very important when we talk about the notion of terrorism and the idea of terrorism. This has specifically, it's marked with Muslimness. It is not applied in any way uniformly. That's why whenever a violent attack takes place in the United States, you will see the reporter or the FBI say, we are not sure if it's terrorist related. Meaning we're not sure whether the perpetrator's name is Muhammad, Khalid, Fatima, and so on, and therefore the identity and the religious identity of the person becomes the framework by this infrastructure, counterterrorism infrastructure is built. And that sits at the juncture of how Muslimness is regulated, covered. I actually wrote a piece about the virtual internment, that while the Japanese had actually faced the physical internment in World War II, the Muslims actually are facing the total virtual internment, where some actually get into direct internment every so often, but the totality of the category of Muslimness is subject to this massive infrastructure. And I think the case of Muhammad Unir is a paradigmatic of this infrastructure that is operating, rather than the country who is a citizen who holds his passport come to his defense, sees him and relates to him as a potential terrorist because of his Muslim identity. And the questions that he is asked are total violation of any basic precepts of freedom of religion as well as basic rights in the society. But Muslims are citizens on probation. Their citizenship is not equal, is not validated, does not have the same standard. And this is actually the period and the environment that we're dealing with. So I wanted just to pick that piece because it's very, very critical, that speaks of the structural Islamophobia that sits at the hub and the intersection of this global war on terrorism that is reflective of countries across the board.
Yeah, thank you, Hatem. Yeah, and I think it's like this whole tentativeness. It's not the normalness, the normalcy of Muslim people, Muslim subject is always tentative. Is not actually there, and then something might happen to question that. But it's always the question of not normal, question of as you saying that it is questionable. It's not really there until they get quote unquote rehabilitated, and then they're not actually, they never become fully like citizens of the world, citizens of countries or whatever, until they're supposed to prove themselves. But that never happens. Actually, it is just like U.S. citizenship, that there is always aspiration to become, or there is expectation to become, but there is always the goalpost keeps moving. Every single time there is an accomplishment. And this is also why in post 9/11 2001 there is continuous attempts by many the sort of like a normalized state of Muslims, Arabs, and people who are aspiring to become quote unquote normal U.S. Citizens, that they never become. I mean, and even if you expect that anybody can even achieve those normal characters or conditions, right? They never become. But that the test is always for the others, the non-whites, others, who are always demanded, expected to continue passing the test, and the goalpost keeps moving, and there are more conditions placed, and the conditions are always structural. They're not individual. They're not because, like some people say, well, let's just go talk to our neighbors. Let's just talk to other people. It's not about individual efforts and you talk to your neighbor and then you get rehabilitated, tomorrow you actually become a quote unquote normal person. It never happens, because there is always ways in which you are questioned whether you become normal or not, and B is that this is the structure. You can never beat it. So this whole thing is like, what have you done, O Muslim? Do you condemn this? Do you condemn that? Do you condemn? So you're always asked to actually respond to questions that are expected and asked from the dominant or from the structures, the big structures, about actions that you may or you may not have thought about, or you may not even want to answer. So there is all of these issues that are that's why, kind of like, when you talk about Islamophobia, we cannot just talk about prejudices of one person or another. It is very much built in the system, and unless and until we actually fight against all forms of prejudices, all forms of racisms, and all forms of discriminations, and also fight against the policies that are connected with it, i.e., for example, U.S. Entangled policies with the policies of Israel and genocide and war and militarization, it is not going to stop. It will continue uh, coming up all the time, sometimes in obvious, sometimes in latent ways. It will always be there. And every once in a while we'll see it, sometimes in overt ways, like canceling the class and so on, and not trying for San Francisco State, for example, trying to come up with all sorts of technical ways and so on, and treat it like, oh, there are a lot. Somebody says, oh, there are a lot of lawyers for San Francisco State said, oh, a lot of courses are treated that way. But this is not a lot of courses. This is a specific way that I don't think they would do this to any courses offered by Israeli studies, but they would do that to courses offered by AMED Studies, because that is something that they can manage and get away with it. While if there is a course about, let's say, anti-Semitism, they would not dare, even if there is one student who is going to it. So there is a way in which these structural issues um, um, act. And I wanted to go maybe back to Mamadou and see if Mamadou, you want to like wade in and comment on these issues, and before I raise the second question.
Yes, I think a couple of things. The first, I didn't get to mention the Malcolm X point, and I think it's
Yeah,
important
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
we all,
Go
we
ahead.
all know
And
about,
you can connect it with the whole question of Islamophobia, racism, discrimination, structural
absolutely,
issues.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, many people will often talk about Malcolm X's article on Zionist logic, but I think perhaps a
Yeah.
less known piece written by Malcolm is that in an interview which he was given about 8 questions, and it is widely reported as to be Malcolm's final written document, right? And in that, I find it super instructive because he's literally talking about these connections here. He's literally talking about the Zionism being an enemy to basically all formerly colonized peoples. He's making the connection between Pan-Africanism. He's making the connection between those who are Arabs, for example. He's making the connection between global South in general and saying that, again, it's not a prejudice. It is a structural condition. And I think why I find it so instructive, because the question becomes, right, why did this revered Black radical find it so important that to name Zionism as being a structural enemy? And likewise, we found it in the legacy of the Black radical tradition. We find that with Kwame Ture as well, who's also someone who arguably in America in the 20th century is one of the most vocal and ardent anti-Zionists. And throughout Kwame Ture's work, and also in Malcolm's, you constantly find them when they arrive to a point of, okay, we cannot provincialize Blackness. We cannot moor Blackness to a particular geography. Rather, that we see Blackness itself as a structural condition, right, of oppression that represents oppression. And we find that Zionism, white supremacy to be the oppressors. And even materially, that is the case, because we understand that it was Zionism that, like in the UN vote against the Algerian self-determination, Zionism was opposed to it, right? We know that Zionism opposed liberation struggles in Namibia, for example. We know that Zionism, right to the very end, was in support of apartheid, right? So what you find is, through Kwame Ture and Malcolm X, you find that there is a linking to say that, yes, Zionism undoubtedly, of course, oppresses Palestinians, but to be pro-Black is to be anti-Zionist. And I think I don't find enough people personally making these links today more and more. And we saw that with Kamala Harris's, for example, election, and liberals, and we understand that there's a liberal capture of blackness, all too often obscuring these understandings of blackness, which was not myopic or provincialized, but rather understood blackness as a structural condition. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a very big kind of discussion that we've had some positions on it. I mean, not positions, some discussions and studies about it, especially. I mean, not especially about the whole question about race, empire, Zionism, the question of Palestinians who of African roots, and in Palestine, and how the analysis is, because there is. A very, I would say, shallow and very short, um, short, like cut to kind of say that it is the same. It's the same. The conditions of this race in the U.S. and race in, like, let's say, other parts of the world where there hasn't been the institution of slavery, and then say that it's all the same, and there is a very different ways of understanding what does it mean, what does it mean of the, let's say, African diaspora in Palestine, if you say it that way, because it is not, the emphasis is not on African diaspora, it's Palestinians of African descent who went to do the Hajj, in the pilgrimage in Mecca, and also stopped to do the second smaller Hajj in Jerusalem, and called Hajj Maqdisi, and stayed in Palestine to be close to Masjid al-Aqsa, and fought in all the wars against the Crusades, against Zionism, against the British, in defense of Jerusalem, in defense of Aqsa Mosque, and are part and parcel of Palestine. This is very different than you're thinking about, like Afro Americans, for example. It's not Afro Palestinians. And I think that is a very different dynamic. That is something that we've discussed, as you remember, Mamadou, at the Malcolm and at the Fanon 100th birthday centennial in Senegal, in your home country, about how do we think about that? How do we think about the dynamics? Because they're very different dynamic, and that leads us to the whole question of third worldism of the global south, and how do we think about the whole question of race, white supremacy. And I think this is something that becomes, and it also relates very much with the question of culture, the question of how people are treated, and if we also relate it also to the way the Liqa is treated in prison as a Palestinian Muslim Arab woman who wears the hijab, and how she is treated in prison. And I wanted to maybe segue to both Amal and Layla on this particular way. What are some of the ways in which she is treated? Because this is also something that we hear a lot about women prisoners in the U.S., in U.S. prisons, and how they are treated. I think a few weeks ago we heard about women in California prisons who were stripped naked. And my mind immediately went to the Palestinian women prisoners, of what's happening to them, and also the women in Hebron who were going through the gates to go to the Brahimi Mosque, and all of these things that happen, and why and how do they happen to women of color, black women, indigenous women, other women of other communities, and so on. And why is this going on? This part of it has to do with coercion and power, and part of it has to do with the white supremacy. And so, if we can talk a little bit about what's happening to Liqa, what is it? What are the things, like how is she able? You talked about Muslim, and so on. What's happening with Ramadan? What's happening with her ability to pray? What's happening with her ability to wudu, in order for her to prepare for what are the things that she needs in prison, and she is not able to get as well. So people who are want to actually engage and participate in this campaign, what can they do? Maybe Amal, you can start, and maybe Layla, you can jump in.
Sure. So, Liqa has really struggled in terms of just being able to practice her faith freely, and something as simple or, something as basic as finding a clean, private place to pray, she's been denied. Like, there's been so many instances where she hasn't been able to find just a clean corner She described the facility as being covered in bugs and roaches, even once like finding a snake while praying. There's no privacy. There's no just, there's no environments that are just quiet in order to allow her to really just to worship in peace. She's also recently, has described that the lack of privacy at the facility has been so bad that she's been sleeping with her hijab on because she just doesn't know when a male officer will just walk into the dorm without announcement, despite her repeated requests that there be announcements before men officers, enter the women's dorm. So there's certainly a lack of just privacy, a lack of respect with with all the women in detention, and just a lack of ability to engage in like the basic fundamental forms of worship, whether that be like prayer or like making wudu in like a clean sanitary place. Like she definitely feels like there just isn't a basic level of hygiene that's required in order to practice her faith. So, I think there's definitely several different struggles on different fronts, from, worship to just like basic necessities, right? Like wanting just a clean place to sleep or a quiet place to sleep. So there's just so many layers to it in terms of just livelihood.
And is she getting like a suhoor and iftar on the times she wants? Is there respect for her when she needs to fast, and what's happening there?
She's repeatedly getting iftar meals late. So she's not getting her meals in time to break her fast. With suhoor, she's been, getting the breakfast meals before, like on time, but still like with not a lot of time to, like actually eat the meal before Fajr. So again, just like not a lot of respect for, suhoor and iftar times.
Are there other like Muslim women prisoners in that
Yes.
detention center? The ICE there are. Okay, so it's not, they
Yeah.
don't have an excuse to say this is new. So it's
Absolutely,
like they actually,
absolutely.
yeah.
It's not unique to her. It's something. It's definitely something that the facility should have expected, should have planned better for, and surely there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of other Muslim detainees before Liqa.
Can I ask you, have there been any officials, members of Congress, any of the officials involved in this? Have there anybody have visited her, wrote about her getting involved? I know that some people in New York have been, but have there been others involved in that?
Yeah, we're definitely engaging with congressional reps, and maybe Leila, I'll have you chime in here since I know you've been leading on some of those efforts, but that's definitely something that we are actively pushing for and working on.
Leila, can you speak about that? Thanks, Amal. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I had to toggle back and forth between the YouTube. I don't know why I can't hear anybody on the.
Sorry.
Yes, I can address that for sure. And I'll share another story. I wanna remind me, Mamadou, I wanna tell you, I don't know, I put in the chat if you knew about Fatima Barnawi when you mentioned the Africans who were going to Palestine in the 30s. But I have a really interesting story with her and interaction. Maybe I'll table that. I'll answer your question first. So when I just will share one story on the subject of Ramadan, and then I'll talk about the legislators and politicians. When I went to visit her in December, I went as a consultant with one of the legal teams, and I was really fortunate to have been able to visit her in person and sit with her for several hours. Which again, this is another when we're talking about just generally. Remember, she's been there for a year. Even though a judge has twice called for her release, she's committed no crime, and yet there she is, right, for a full year. And the most of the contact that she gets with people, including family members and loved ones, is behind wired glass. For those who can even afford to fly, it's a very long distance to go, and then another hour from Dallas. But as I was speaking with her, that occurred to me that she has gotten so little human contact with people, with other women from her family, with other loved ones, and so on. Anyway, I was talking to her, and it wasn't Ramadan, but we did mention there's not many, but there are a few other Muslim women. They go and they come Some, some have been deported and so on. And I reached into my pocket. I was wearing my jacket. It was a chilly day in Dallas. And I realized I had 3 dates with me. And I kind of gave them to her. I said, listen, I have these, for whatever they're worth. The food is horrible. I know, and I was told by formerly incarcerated with her that, anything, the food is just so horrific that anything. So I didn't really think much of it. And later I was talking to her, and she said, I wanted to share a story with you. There was one Iraqi woman who was with me, and she happened to be fasting on that day. And outside of Ramadan, it's essentially impossible for them to attain, next to impossible, halal food, but let alone dates is not something that is ever going to be. And she said, SubhanAllah, just, I don't know, you know, it was by good fortune, by divine intervention, I happened to have these 3 dates with me. And she was fasting. And so I gave her one date. And there was a Chinese woman who wasn't Muslim, but had tasted the dates from the previous Ramadan. She said she started to jump up and down in excitement. And I gave her the second date, and I saved the third date for myself. So that's just the story of the 3 dates when you mentioned Ramadan. No, the food is so bad that it literally caused her to have a seizure when she's never had one before because she's so malnourished, right? So yeah, I think Ahmed covered that pretty well. The needs of an observant Muslim woman who observes hijab are difficult, are different. I think of this for our beloved sisters in Gaza, right? Intense with same thing, no privacy. You need a place to put your hijab on. You can't have men walking in and out and so on. Even when you're making wudu, it needs to be in a private place, and that just simply doesn't exist, is what she told me. And so I do feel that there's a special, it's incumbent upon all of us to fight, of course, for everyone, but especially for our Muslim sisters who continue to be incarcerated. With regards to politicians, yes. And so this has been pretty slow moving, but luckily in December, finally, Senators Booker and Kim and Congresswoman Poe, and then Van Hollen, even though he's not from New Jersey, was like, me too, sign me up, right? Submitted a letter to the Department of Homeland Security inquiring about her case and asking for her release. So that was the first and most sort of official thing that has happened. And it wasn't until her recent hospitalization, and I say disappearance, that suddenly there was a little bit more interest from politicians. But again, they've been very slow moving. I visited Senator Kim's office and was trying to push him to do more, to sponsor a resolution calling for her release, to maybe lead a congressional delegation to visit her. And he was like, yeah, maybe if like someone else's office does it, we'll see. It's this kind of wait and see attitude, right? But time is of the essence now, because the longer she stays there, the less public interest there is, the less likely that she is to get out. And but I will report that her recent disappearance to the hospital has activated a lot of communities that didn't know about her before, and so that's good. And her community in New Jersey has been incredibly active. Obviously, there hasn't been as much coverage in the media until recently, but I am planning on meeting with Senator Van Hollen soon, and I'm hopeful to see if I can get him more interested and involved. But I will say to those listening, this is something that you can do to help, right? They don't have to be New Jersey. If you're in New Jersey, all the better, because we really need to push Booker on this, to go and visit her. This is the big next ask, is they need to be able to, only local state Texas legislators have gone and tried to visit, were denied a visit, and had a press conference about it. But we really need the national congressman I guess that's a redundancy, to do more. So push your representatives, call them, ask them to inquire about her case, to ask for her to be released, and to go and to either sponsor a resolution calling for her release, or to join others in going to visit her.
I also want to ask you about the various women legislatures, the women's groups.
Yeah, that's
Where are
true.
they? What have they done? Because it's really, they need to. I mean, it doesn't matter, as you said, that you don't have to be from that state or
No,
something.
no.
What are they doing? What statements are? This is a woman who's almost a year has been in prison, and for no reason, and she's been basically kidnapped and
Yeah.
incarcerated, disappeared, and for no reason, and all her rights have been violated. Where are they? Why aren't they issuing statements? What are they going to go visit? And I do remember like when the children who are incarcerated and so on, they all go. And I'm not saying, because why aren't you need to be doing this for everybody. That's your job. You are representing the people, and you're representing everybody, and you speak about women's rights, and you speak about human rights and so on. Where are you? We want to hear from you. Speak up. You need to go, you need to issue statements, you need to all be concerned, you need to all be hosting, you and Amal, you need to have everybody speak about this. This is not okay. It's not okay that nobody is speaking about her when this is a very clear human story. This is a very clear, violation. I wanted to say something before I turn over
Yeah,
to
I will say
others
on
to
that
speak.
point, it's selective
Yeah,
outrage, right? I mean,
yeah.
it's where were these same groups when women, Palestinian women, were experiencing sexual violence, and I mean, we could go on and on about this, right? But
And everybody spoke
it's
about it, and also everybody hyped up the lie about the mass rape by Palestinian men, which was complete lie, which reminds us of Emmett Till and every single man of color, African, Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, this whole perpetuation of the Islamophobic garbage. And all the stories about Palestinian women, children, men, it's all gone. So I think it's really, really important to be out there and do this and get it out. I'm not going to, and we have only maybe a couple of minutes, so I wanted to see maybe in 30 seconds if everybody wants to just say something, because definitely the discussion is not over. There is a lot we left out, we haven't spoken about. So I'm going to go for 30 seconds for each one of you to just like say words of closure. So Hatem, go first, please.
I think the crisis that we're facing with Islamophobia is one of history and continuity of both empire, otherization, colonialism, capitalism, and racism, all intertwined, and gets to be focused when we have another episode of genocide. So this is a work that we have to continue, and it's definitely an uphill struggle, but it is still winnable.
Thank you. Amal? Amal?
Yeah, I'll just echo. Yes, hi. I'll just echo what Dr. Hatim just shared. That we're seeing all the different forms of Islamophobia, and how they are impacting our communities from abroad, witnessing a genocide in Gaza, to our very own home country, where we're seeing our government target and detain and disappear our community members.
Thank you. Leila? Leila?
sorry, it's the whole YouTube thing. I couldn't hear Ahmed,
Yeah.
so I had to.
Just your last words, yeah.
Yes, I don't know. I mean, I feel like everyone has essentially, said what needs to be said, but the battle continues, the fight against injustice, against Islamophobia, which I'm seeing again. I mentioned this earlier, but it's taking on new forms. It's getting rebranded, much in the same way that, racism continues to take on new forms, and I think that's what we need to keep an eye out for.
Thank you. Mamadou?
Yeah, just once again, thank you so much. And just in conclusion, I think it now more than ever, we need scholarship that actually, an analysis that speaks to our condition, that I think for far too long, we've seen the liberal capture of the academy. And I think we have to be able to continue to carve out spaces in our scholarship that upholds the right to resist and that upholds the right for Palestinians as well, and continually making these connections. Whereas others want to provincialize our disciplines, I think there's far more that connects us in terms of our struggles. So thank you.
Thank you all. This has been really amazing, way beyond my wildest expectations. Thank you all for coming here, for sharing information, for sharing analysis, for sharing this with all our audiences. Our students are definitely going to learn, and I'm saying students all over the world who are going to be learning with us. Thank you for being so resilient, so strong, so wonderful, learning, teaching, analyzing, being on the front line, standing up for people who are not able to speak because they're being silenced. And thank you, Liqa. Thank you, Mamadou. Thank you for everybody in Gaza, in Texas, in Minneapolis, in Berkeley, everywhere. We're standing up. And definitely, I always say that we will win. Zionism is a passing phenomenon, but it's not going to pass by itself. White supremacy is a passing phenomenon, but we have to make it pass. Thank you all for being here, for being so amazing. And we will definitely meet again. Thank you for being willing to give your time and to build justice for everybody. And thank you for our audience. And Ramadan Kareem.